During a briefing, one sentence made everyone sit up straight. My name is Marcus, and I work at Pinnacle Financial as a senior analyst. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., our entire department sits through the W. I arrived at the Tuesday review meeting 5 minutes early. Everyone else was already there, laptops open and notebooks ready. Blake stood at the front of the conference room, fiddling with his PowerPoint presentation while the rest of us sipped stale coffee from paper cups. The clock hit 2 p.m. and Blake cleared his throat. Let's get started with our quarterly projections, he announced in his usual monotone. I stifled a yawn. These meetings were always the same. Numbers going up, numbers going down, more corporate jargon than anyone could stomach. I discreetly pulled out my phone under the table and checked my fantasy football stats. Blake droned on about market fluctuations and investment strategies. The other 12 analysts around the table looked equally bored, some doodling in notebooks, others staring blankly at the screen. And of course, with the restructuring next month, we'll need to prepare for significant personnel changes, Blake said casually. I was still scrolling through my phone when I felt the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. I glanced up to see everyone sitting ramrod straight in their chairs, eyes wide and focused on Blake. Blake suddenly stumbled over his words. Potential changes. Nothing concrete yet. He shuffled his papers nervously. Let's move on to the budget projections for next quarter. Something had happened, but I had no idea what. I looked around at my colleagues, all of whom were now intensely focused on their laptops or notebooks, avoiding eye contact with each other and especially with me. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes, with Blake rushing through the rest of his presentation. When he asked if there were any questions, the room remained silent, which was unusual. Typically, Xavier or Noel would have something to ask. Blake dismissed us quickly, gathering his materials with unusual haste. I approached Simone as we filed out of the conference room. She was normally chatty, always ready with the latest office gossip. What was that about? I asked her. Everyone got weird all of a sudden. Simone clutched her notebook to her chest. Sorry, Marcus. I've got to finish that report for Blake. Talk later? She hurried away before I could respond. I headed toward the IT department to ask Andre about a system issue I'd been having. Andre was always joking around with everyone, making the office a bit more bearable with his humor. Hey, Andre, got a minute? I asked as I approached his desk. He barely looked up from his computer. Busy. I waited for his usual follow-up joke, but nothing came. It'll just take a second. My access to the financial reporting system is acting up. Put in a ticket, he replied, still not meeting my eyes. I frowned and walked back to my cubicle, confused by the cold shoulder. On my way, I spotted Xavier heading to the break room and followed him. Xavier, what did Blake say in the meeting that made everyone freak out? I asked directly. I missed it while checking my phone. Xavier shrugged, his eyes darting around nervously. I wasn't really paying attention either, just more corporate bullshit, you know? I knew he was lying. Xavier never missed a detail in meetings. He was always the one taking notes and asking pointed questions. Come on, man, something happened in there, I pressed. Xavier fidgeted with his coffee mug. I really don't know what you're talking about. I should get back to work. He brushed past me and practically ran back to his desk. By late afternoon, I noticed people were actively avoiding me. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Colleagues suddenly remembered urgent tasks when I approached them. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen. Something was definitely wrong. Blake had said something important in that meeting, something about restructuring and personnel changes. The realization hit me like a truck. Layoffs. He must have accidentally announced layoffs. But why was everyone avoiding me specifically? I looked around the office floor and caught Patrice, Blake's executive assistant, watching me with what looked like pity before quickly averting her eyes. A chill ran down my spine. I was on the list. I had to be. Why else would everyone be treating me like I had the plague? The rest of the day crawled by in uncomfortable silence. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody emailed me. It was as if I had already been erased from the company. I packed up my things at 5 o'clock, my mind racing. Tomorrow I would confront Blake directly and ask what was going on. I deserved to know if my job was on the line. As I walked to the elevator, I passed Noel talking to another colleague. They immediately stopped speaking when they saw me. I heard Noel whisper, "Poor guy," as the elevator doors closed between us. I entered the break room the next morning and all conversation instantly stopped. 4 of my colleagues were huddled around the coffee machine, cups in hand, suddenly fascinated by the floor tiles. The silence was deafening. I nodded awkwardly and headed for the coffee pot. Behind me, I heard whispers resume, too low to make out the words. I poured my coffee and turned around, catching Noel's eye briefly before she looked away. Poor guy, she whispered to the person next to her. He doesn't even... She stopped abruptly when she realized I was listening. Doesn't even what? I asked directly. Noel's face flushed red. Nothing. Just talking about the game last night. She grabbed her coffee and practically ran from the break room. The others followed quickly. I stood alone with my coffee, a knot forming in my stomach. This was getting ridiculous. I needed answers. On my way back to my desk, I passed Blake's office. The door was partially open, and I could hear him speaking with Patrice inside. We need to finalize the list by Friday, Blake was saying. HR wants everything in order before the announcements. Patrice's voice was lower, but I clearly heard her response. What about Marcus? When are you going to tell him? I froze outside the door, my coffee nearly spilling. Blake said something I couldn't make out, and then footsteps approached the door. I hurried away before they could catch me, eavesdropping. At lunchtime, I approached Simone's desk. Want to grab lunch? I asked, trying to sound casual. This was our normal routine. At least it had been until this week. Simone didn't look up from her computer. Can't today. Deadline. She kept typing, her eyes fixed on the screen. That's what you said yesterday. And the day before, I pointed out. Is something going on? She finally looked up, her expression unreadable. Nothing's going on. I'm just busy. She turned back to her work, effectively dismissing me. I ate lunch alone at my desk, scrolling through my emails. I noticed I hadn't been included on several department-wide communications. Messages about upcoming projects and team updates had somehow skipped my inbox entirely. By mid-afternoon, I decided to confront Xavier directly. I cornered him in the copy room where he couldn't easily escape. What's going on? I demanded. Everyone's acting weird. No one will talk to me. I'm being left off email chains. Xavier fidgeted with the papers in his hand. I don't know what you're talking about. Cut the crap, I said. We've been friends for 3 years. Just tell me what's happening. He looked at the door like he was planning an escape route. Look, I can't. It's not my place to say anything. He pushed past me and hurried back to his desk. Later that afternoon, I tried to access our financial reporting system to complete my weekly analysis. The screen flashed an error message. Access restricted. Contact system administrator. I called Andre in IT immediately. My system access is blocked, I told him when he finally answered. Can you fix it? I'll look into it, he said flatly. Might take a few days. A few days? I need it for my weekly report due tomorrow. There was a pause on the line. Talk to Blake about that. He hung up without another word. I glanced across the office floor and noticed a woman I recognized as Renee from compliance watching me. When our eyes met, she didn't look away like everyone else had been doing. She just stared, her expression calculating. Feeling increasingly paranoid, I pulled up Blake's calendar on the shared system. Most meetings were labeled with generic titles, but one caught my eye. Emergency meeting, personnel security issue, scheduled for yesterday afternoon. The attendees included Blake, Sloan from HR, Renee, and several others. My heart raced. I was the security issue. I had to be. At 4:55 p.m., just as I was preparing to leave, an email notification popped up on my screen. It was from Blake, requesting my presence in his office at 9 a.m. Monday morning. The subject line read simply, important meeting. No details, no agenda, just an ominous meeting request for first thing Monday. I shut down my computer and gathered my things. The weekend stretched ahead of me, 2 days of anxiety and uncertainty, before I would finally learn what everyone else already seemed to know. As I walked toward the elevator, I saw Patrice watching me with that same pitying look she'd given me yesterday. Now I understood why. My job was on the line. Maybe it was already gone. The elevator doors closed, and I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Monday couldn't come soon enough. At least then I'd know the truth. I spent the entire weekend reviewing all my work from the past year. Every spreadsheet, every report, every email. I was looking for mistakes, something that could have triggered this strange behavior from my colleagues. Nothing stood out. My work was solid. I'd met every deadline, completed every assignment. The anxiety ate away at me as Sunday night turned into early Monday morning. I arrived at the office at 8:30, wanting a few minutes to prepare before my 9 a.m. meeting with Blake. The elevator doors opened to reveal Lionel, a security guard I'd seen around but rarely interacted with, standing outside Blake's office. My stomach dropped. Security guards didn't typically hang around executive offices unless something serious was happening. Lionel nodded at me as I approached, his face carefully neutral. They're expecting you, he said, opening Blake's door without knocking. I stepped inside and immediately froze. Blake wasn't alone. Sloan from HR sat in one of the chairs facing his desk, a folder in her lap. Renee from compliance stood by the window, arms crossed. Marcus, please sit down, Blake said, gesturing to the empty chair next to Sloan. I sat slowly, my mouth suddenly dry. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, tense. No one was making eye contact except Blake, who stared at me with an unreadable expression. I need to explain what happened last Tuesday, Blake began. During our review meeting, I inadvertently disclosed confidential information. My heart pounded in my chest. So, I had been right about the layoffs. I mentioned restructuring and personnel changes, he continued. What I accidentally revealed was that we had finalized a list of employees being terminated next month. Sloan shifted in her seat, her folder clutched tightly in her hands. Renee continued to watch from the window, her face impassive. Your name was on that list, Marcus, Blake said quietly. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. So, that explained everything. The pitying looks, the whispers, the isolation. They all knew I was getting fired before I did. I understand, I said, trying to maintain my dignity. I appreciate you telling me now rather than... Blake held up his hand, stopping me mid-sentence. That's not why we're here today. Confusion replaced my momentary relief. If not to fire me, then what was this meeting about? After I realized my mistake in the meeting, we decided to accelerate certain processes, Blake continued. One of those was a routine security audit of our financial systems. Renee stepped forward now, placing a laptop on Blake's desk and turning it to face me. We found some irregularities, Marcus. The screen showed a series of transactions, highlighted in red. My transactions, my secret transactions. Over the past 3 years, you've been systematically diverting company funds through a series of shell companies, Renee said, her voice clinical and detached. Starting with small amounts, gradually increasing as you grew more confident. My blood turned to ice. They knew. They had found everything. Shellfish Investments LLC, Blake read from the screen. Registered in Delaware 2 years ago with a post office box as its only address. Owned by a holding company that traces back to you. I said nothing. What could I possibly say? Sloan opened her folder and pulled out a document. We have 2 options here, Marcus. Option 1 is we press charges. Embezzlement, wire fraud, falsifying company records. She placed the document on the desk in front of me. Option 2 is you resign quietly. Return the money, and we don't involve the authorities. I stared at the paper, the words swimming before my eyes. A resignation letter, already typed up, waiting for my signature. How much? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Nearly $200,000, Renee replied, all traced and documented. The room fell silent. I looked at each of their faces, finally understanding why everyone had been avoiding me all week. It wasn't just that I was getting fired. They all knew what I had done. The entire office knows, don't they? I asked. Blake nodded slowly. Not the details, but rumors spread after Renee's team started the investigation. People talk, so that explained the whispers, the pitying looks, the sudden silence when I entered rooms. Poor guy doesn't even know we've caught him, they were probably saying. You have until the end of the day to decide, Sloan said, standing up. Either sign the resignation and arrange for repayment, or we call the police. She placed her card on top of the resignation letter. My direct line, call me when you've made your decision. Blake stood as well, signaling the end of the meeting. Lionel will escort you to your desk to collect personal items. Your system access has already been revoked. I remained seated, still processing everything. The careful scheme I'd built over years, discovered because Blake accidentally mentioned layoffs in a meeting and I was too busy checking fantasy football scores to notice. Did anyone suspect before last week? I asked, curious despite my situation. Renee shook her head. You were good, small amounts, well hidden. It was only the forensic audit that caught it. I nodded, oddly proud of my technical skill even as my career and possibly my freedom crumbled around me. One last question, I said, standing slowly. If Blake hadn't slipped up about the layoffs, would you have caught me anyway? Blake and Renee exchanged glances. Eventually, Renee said, regular audits might have missed it, but we do deeper dives periodically. I picked up the resignation letter and Sloane's card. I'll call you with my decision. Lionel was waiting outside the door. He didn't speak as we walked to my cubicle. Everyone watched as I approached, their eyes following me across the office floor. Xavier looked away when I caught his eye. Simone suddenly became very interested in her computer screen. The silence was deafening as I emptied my desk drawer into a cardboard box Lionel had handed me. 3 years of careful planning, undone in a week. And the worst part was, everyone had known before me. They'd all been watching, waiting for the axe to fall, while I walked around oblivious to my own downfall. I picked up the box and followed Lionel to the elevator, the weight of dozens of stairs on my back. The doors closed, and I was alone with my thoughts and a security guard who wouldn't look me in the eye. The company I'd stolen from, the colleagues I'd deceived, the life I'd just lost, all because I wasn't paying attention when it mattered most. I handed over my company ID and key card to Sloane without a word. What was there to say? The evidence against me was overwhelming. $200,000. All traced back to my shell companies. Lionel stood at the door, waiting to escort me out. His face remained neutral, professional, no judgment, just doing his job. Personal items only, Sloane reminded me as I prepared to leave Blake's office. Any company property stays behind. I nodded and followed Lionel to my cubicle. The walk felt like a death march. Every eye in the office tracked our movement across the floor. The silence was deafening. My desk looked exactly as I'd left it on Friday. Family photo, stress ball, coffee mug from last year's company retreat, all meaningless now. I pulled open my drawer and emptied the contents into the cardboard box Lionel had handed me. 3 years at Pinnacle Financial, reduced to a half-empty box of personal trinkets. Simone kept her head down as I cleaned out my desk. She had been my lunch buddy for years. Now she couldn't even look at me. Xavier approached cautiously while Lionel watched from a respectful distance. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to another. I tried to warn you, he said quietly. All those times I avoided your questions. I thought you might figure it out and stop before they caught you. I was stunned. You knew? He shook his head. Not exactly. Renee asked me some questions about your access to certain accounts. I connected the dots. I felt betrayed and grateful at the same time. At least someone had tried to help me. In their own way. Time to wrap it up, Lionel called from a few feet away. I closed my now empty drawer and picked up my box. There was nothing else to say or do. My career at Pinnacle was over. Sloane was waiting by the elevator with more paperwork. She held out a thick document with yellow tabs marking signature lines. Standard severance agreement, she explained. You waive all rights to sue the company. We don't press charges if you return the full amount within 30 days. I took the document and signed without reading it. What choice did I have? Prison wasn't an option I wanted to consider. Renee appeared as I handed the signed papers back to Sloane. She looked professional, not triumphant or angry. It was a random audit that caught you, she said. We weren't targeting you specifically. The system flagged unusual payment patterns to vendors with limited transaction history. I was curious despite my situation. How long had you known? Just over a week, she replied. Once we found the first transaction, the rest was easy to trace. Blake joined us by the elevator, hands in his pockets. He looked tired, not angry. We kept it quiet to secure the electronic evidence, he explained. If you'd known we were investigating, you might have deleted files or covered your tracks. I nodded. It made sense. The whole office watching me squirm for a week while they gathered evidence against me. What happens now? I asked as the elevator arrived. That depends on you, Sloane said. Return the money, we all move on. Don't return it, we file charges. Simple as that. My future, condensed into 2 stark options. The elevator doors opened and Lionel gestured for me to enter. I stepped inside, turned to face my former colleagues one last time. No one spoke as the doors closed. My time at Pinnacle Financial was officially over. Outside the building, Lionel watched as I walked to my car. The morning sun felt too bright, too normal for such a life-changing day. My phone buzzed with a text as I reached for my car door. It was from Simone. "I can't believe you had this secret life all this time. I thought I knew you. Why did you do it?" I deleted the message without responding. Then I scrolled through my contacts and began deleting everyone from Pinnacle. Xavier, Simone, Blake, Noel, all gone with a few swipes. Lionel remained at the entrance, watching as I got into my car. I wondered how many other disgraced employees he had escorted out over the years. I started the engine and pulled away from Pinnacle Financial for the last time. $200,000 to repay. Possible criminal charges hanging over my head. A career in financial services completely destroyed. All because Blake accidentally mentioned layoffs in a meeting, and I was too distracted by fantasy football to notice I was on the list. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I drove away, I realized everyone had known my secret before I knew theirs. They'd watched me all week, waiting for the hammer to fall, while I walked around oblivious to my own downfall. The strangest part was feeling almost relieved. No more hiding. No more schemes, no more looking over my shoulder, just the consequences of my actions finally catching up to me.